Neo-Assyrian goddesses are eternal models for the mortal queens of Nimrud. Well, that title covers a lot of ground, and for all of our sakes, let me begin by breaking down what exactly I'm up to. This paper presents a strategy and some preliminary research that I hope will contribute to a chapter on Neo-Assyrian images of the office of queenship. This chapter is part of my book about the queens of Nimrud's Northwest Palace, hence the specificity of my focus today. With today's paper, as indicated in the title, I introduce two streams of research. First, I survey and analyze visual and textual representations of goddesses in Neo-Assyrian culture. Second, I consider the similarities, differences, and relationships between these feminine manifestations of divinity, i.e. goddesses, sometimes described as divine queens, and human manifestations of queenship, i.e. mortal queens, in particular, those who lived, died, and were immortalized in the tombs at Nimrud's Northwest Palace. I hypothesized that divine queens provided models for royal women who emulated and mortally embodied divine ideals and identities in their fulfillment of the office of queenship. At this stage of my research, I'm sharing my process, thoughts, plans, and questions. In so doing, I hope to seed a productive discussion that might not only further this project, but also stimulate others. When we think of goddesses, we need to move past the traps of popular culture. Even as scholars, we may at first jump to the obvious, Ishtar, and in later Neo-Assyrian periods, Mulissu. These goddesses are indeed of primary importance to this study. They are among the most frequently occurring in ancient sources and in modern scholarship, and will be specifically addressed. But Neo-Assyrian records include so many more, such as Gula, Ninsun, and Teshmetu. Orak also provides a broad and very useful list, reminding us of others, including Aya, Baba, and Shala. For many goddesses, there is no known iconography, and for some, their textual occurrences are scant. However, compiling the identities, actions, and descriptors of a wide range of goddesses in the Neo-Assyrian records, we find among these divine women examples of maidens, wives, mothers, daughters, and queens. Various goddesses are associated with sexual allure, birth, agricultural fertility, healing, and protective, as well as destructive powers. I suggest that these aspects of divine identity correlate to Neo-Assyrian cultural conceptions of femininity and, in most cases, its ideals. In addition to surveying goddesses in myths and literature, my research takes into account references in royal annals, historical texts, letters, and administrative and temple documents. For example, the Neo-Assyrian tablet shown here mentions female members of the royal family participating in a ritual at the sanctuary of Ashur, Mulissu, and Shurua, who is either the second wife of Ashur or his daughter. As divine devotees, queens were proximally, visually, and conceptually associated with goddesses, to whom they dedicated jewelry and gifts, and from whom they received divine favor. Analyzing the written record in conjunction with images, I aim to contextualize the roles of goddesses and their narratives into mortal culture and ritual, as, for example, is demonstrated on this bronze relief fragment depicting Nakia, probably as Queen Mother, processing in ritual with the king. Some goddesses, exemplified by Ishtar, offer a great depth of evidence that must be considered. Dedicated texts, such as the Neo-Assyrian version of the Descent of Ishtar, provide a wealth of details as well. In the Descent, not only do we learn about her relationship to earthly fertility, but we also have a description of her adornments. But are those adornments particular to Ishtar? Are they even particular to goddesses? Well, the material record certainly evinces the radiance of royal women, perhaps akin to the divine characteristics of Malamu. And a quick match of Ishtar's adornments to goods from the queen's tombs at Nimrud seem to present a shortcut to identifying Neo-Assyrian queens with Ishtar, especially in their descent to the netherworld. But connecting queens to particular goddesses is not a tidy business. To begin with, just understanding Ishtar is not simple. It's nearly impossible. Across regions and millennia, scholars have investigated the complexities of Ishtar and her various epithets, forms, such as Ishtar Barbella, Ishtar Nineveh, and ambiguities. In the case of Ishtar, the visual record is also rich, but rife with uncertainty regarding whether the figure is actually Ishtar. For example, I draw your attention to the throne goddess on this Neo-Assyrian period gold seal. Her identity is debated between Ishtar, Mulissu, Gulu, and Ashur, with arguments centering around whether the animal is a dog or a lion, and whether the scorpion is associated with the goddess or is an independent marker of queenship identifying the seal's owner, Queen Hama. Some have proposed, too, that Ishtar synchronized with Mulissu and other goddesses in certain periods, and maybe under particular circumstances. Thus, if we can't decide which goddess is portrayed, could she be all of the above? Or what we might call an Ishtar plus, or Mulissu plus? There is also a debate as to whether a figure may represent a particular aspect of Ishtar, and if so, which one? Furthermore, could multiple aspects of Ishtar be depicted next to one another, as we may see here in the bottom right line drawing of a Neo-Assyrian period cylinder seal? Can multiple Ishtars coexist? Is there even, or is there also, one true Ishtar? This is a complex topic addressed by Ilona Jolnay in her dissertation. Now, let's look at a broader sample of the visual record as a primary source. Neo-Assyrian art portrays goddesses in large and small scale. We find them, for example, on rock reliefs at Maltai and Bavian dating to Sennacherib's reign. Although these remote cliffs may have been rarely viewed by human eyes, they certainly demonstrate Neo-Assyrian visual conceptions of the divine. In particular, as you can see here in the Maltai carving, they illustrate female deities who are venerated by the king alongside male deities. Effectively, we have goddesses operating in concert with gods. In this case, the seated figure is typically interpreted as Ninlil or Mulissu, the consort of Ashur, the state god, who leads the line that makes direct contact with the king. Ninlil Mulissu's position behind Ashur, her enthronement as queen, suggests her identity. At the end of the line is probably Ishtar. But the goddess's unique attributes are not clear. Like the enthroned goddess, she is situated atop a lion. Besides their beardlessness, the goddesses at Maltai are barely physically distinguished from their male counterparts. Looking carefully at these photos, we can see a little bit of differentiation. Here, the goddesses are portrayed shorter than the gods, and in panel C, which is better preserved, it seems that the female hairstyle is a bit puffier, the robe may have an extra layer at the shoulder, and the forearm may be less muscular. Thus, a body type is not fully expressed or idealized as feminine. The Bavian relief portrays a goddess as a beardless figure holding a staff topped by a tree with pomegranate-tipped branches. She's typically interpreted as a conflation of Mulissu, Ninlil, and Ishtar. Her wrists and neck are covered with rosettes. However, the floral, fruit, and tree imagery is not exclusively female. It is the iconography of what Irene Winter has dubbed a rhetoric of abundance of the Assyrian state. But perhaps it is a goddess who effuses this abundance. In this case, perhaps the goddess's domain is particularly distinguished from the gods, although, as in the multi-examples, her physical appearance as female is distinguished by her lack of a beard, not the body type. From these two examples of rock-cut reliefs, the goddesses are primarily recognizable through their attributes, demonstrating the importance of their conceptual roles over their distinctly feminine appearance. Furthermore, these reliefs demonstrate the need for goddesses among gods, especially in interactions with the king. Although the rock reliefs are later in date than the Nimrud context I aim to elucidate, the goddess figures are similar to those dating to the 8th and 9th century. At the smallest scale, goddesses appear on Neo-Assyrian stamp and cylinder seals, including many excavated from Nimrud's northwest palace. Their imagery can be generalized into two categories: scenes in which a mortal venerates them, and singular divine depictions. The veneration scenes, as shown here, differ from those on the rock reliefs because, while some depict male worshippers, many portray female worshippers, including royal women, probably queens. On this gold stamp seal, the female worshipper is very likely Queen Hama. An inscription around the edge of the seal names her, and the seal itself was buried on the body of a crowned and elaborately adorned woman, presumably Hama herself. But who is the goddess? I'm inclined to identify her as Mulissu, or a Mulissu plus, but, as I've mentioned, her identity is thoroughly debated. A gold pendant, also excavated from the royal women's tombs at Nimrud's northwest palace, depict a similar scene of goddess veneration. Here, as you can see more clearly in the line drawing, a beardless figure, probably a royal woman, approaches a goddess. This is likely Ishtar, on account of her bare leg and weapons. The star atop her headdress, however, is not specific to Ishtar. We see it on the rock reliefs atop all of the gods. These two objects provide an opportunity, though, to compare the appearance of a goddess to the appearance of a queen. The divine figures tower over the mortals and are equipped with attributes and tall headdresses. The mortals wear similar long belted robes to the goddess on the Hama seal, but the goddess on the pendant wears a more elaborate dress. Judging from these images, one might conclude the goddesses were ornately adorned and queens were not. However, ritual contexts may have differed in their dress requirements from courtly contexts, in which a queen would have been presented as the highest mortal female power. In a court ceremony, a queen at Nimrud may have looked something like this 3D model. In fact, she may have been more heavily adorned, as queens were in death. But in temple contexts, where mortals approached cult statues, as perhaps Queen Akia is portrayed doing on this bronze plaque, queens may have dressed more simply, as they did not want to outshine the goddess or her cult statue. This downscaling in dress may also be demonstrated in a possible queen statue, seen on the right, that would have been installed as a votive in a temple. This votive sculpture is even barefoot. Royal records refer to Nakia dedicating likenesses of herself to temples, but there's no description of their appearance. Returning to images of goddesses on seals, there also seems to be a genre, although it may be specific to the 7th century, of depicting goddesses seated or enthroned behind tables laden with offerings or banqueting materials. The identities of the goddesses shown here are undetermined, but it's notable that the mortals included men and women. There are also cases of Neo-Assyrian glyptic in which two goddesses are depicted in veneration scenes. On the left, you see a female worshipper facing an enthroned goddess, and another standing goddess is poised behind the worshipper. Now, on the right, we have two goddesses. We have two versions of Ishtar, perhaps, simultaneously expressed. Shifting now to some examples of singular goddess imagery, we have what is typically interpreted as the martial and sexual aspects of Ishtar. In particular, we have many examples of what is sometimes generalized as the naked goddess, or more specifically denoted as Ishtar in her sexual aspect. The nude figures are always winged, probably to differentiate them from a nude mortal, as they typically have no other attributes and rarely wear a headdress. Sometimes, as you see in the first two examples on the left, which both come from the Nimrud tombs, some fabric appears behind the figure, but she's not completely naked. Otherwise, she is completely naked. Now, especially though, in the more schematic, abstracted examples, such as you see on the right, the fabric falls away, as do the breasts. Across the figures, the hips are prominent, and in the simplest example, the hips render the body female, while the wings render the figure divine. While it's generally assumed that the nude figure is associated with sexual allure, I suggest that biological fertility and reproduction were also implied. For example, the nude goddesses we just viewed were carved on the bottom of cow pendants. Stamping an animal to beget a figure calls to mind reproduction and birth. My survey of goddess imagery is not comprehensive, but I do want to include one last set of divine female images, female genies. In Neo-Assyrian art, the winged genie on the right, which looks like a horned and winged king, is a pretty common sight. But female genies? As illustrated here on the left, a pair is found on a relief in room L of Nimrud's Northwest Palace. Female genies also make a few appearances in garment decorations incised on the reliefs at Nimrud. On the example on the right, a breast even appears to be indicated. Furthermore, it's unclear whether the garment covers her pubic area or simply hangs behind the body in the manner of the fabric backdrop seen on some of the seals. Returning once more to glyptic imagery, we find an example of a male winged genie flanking a nude winged goddess. This suggests the potential for elision or conflation between the nude goddess and the female genie, both of which have 4 wings. The genie's association with fertility may not be unrelated to the nude goddess. Indeed, both male and female genies tend the sacred tree, ensuring the future infertility of the Assyrian state. On a related note, winged female figures embellishing a crown from the queen's tombs at Nimrud also evoke both nude goddesses and winged genies, as they balance amidst a mass of fruits, flowers, and grape leaves, effusing fecundity. Here ends our survey of the imagery and begins a summary consideration of goddesses as eternal models for mortal queens. We have observed the authority and veneration of queens, as well as the cooperation of gods and goddesses, and the roles of divine male and female figures in maintaining the life and future of the state. Clearly, the divine provided models for the king and queen as sovereign and powerful consort. We have also discussed the range of divine female identities and qualities expressed in text and image that are relevant to an ideal woman, a queen. I consider that these various qualities, or their past expression, or their future potential, were understood to reside within the ideal mortal woman. That is, for example, she could be sexual, maternal, physically powerful, capable of healing, and protective at the same time. Perhaps she could even simultaneously embody the various life stages of womanhood, from having been a maiden to having the potential to live to be Queen Mother, to carrying her earned identities with her into the afterlife. Such a breadth of qualities and potentials is seen in the divine realm through syncretism, polyvalence, and the concurrent representation of different aspects of Ishtar. Some questions linger, though. What about negative qualities shown in goddesses, such as Ereshkigal? And to what extent might Neo-Assyrian ideals of queenship have drawn upon foreign models, such as Anatolian and especially Levantine goddesses? And what about male gods? Might they also have offered divine models for mortal women? As I conclude now, let's revisit 1986, when, with his seminal article, Was Sennacherib a Feminist?, Julian Reed suggested that Sennacherib, in the course of his religious reforms, gave more status to the queen, setting up a parallel between the state god Ashur and his goddess wife Mulissu, and the mortal king and queen. My research has begun to delve earlier into the 8th and 9th centuries to evaluate the precedent for relationships between queens and goddesses. While it appears to me that goddesses provided a sort of umbrella model for queens throughout the Neo-Assyrian period, Mulissu as a consort of the state god was certainly known as a model to the queens at Nimrud. In fact, Ashurnasirpal II's queen was named Mulissu Muqaneshat Ninua. Perhaps Mulissu would have offered a specific model for the royal couple in courtly ceremonies. In death, maybe Ishtar provided a closer model. And for eternity, the dead queens at Nimrud may have been modeled, dressed, and provisioned to live on as their royal selves, as exemplars of the eternal office of Neo-Assyrian queenship among the divine in the afterlife. Thank you.